Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
We bring you the latest developments out of the Middle East. A U.S. Navy ship has responded to a flurry of drone and missile strikes against commercial ships in the Red Sea. At the same time, Israel's military is expanding its operations now across the Gaza Strip. We get the latest from Bloomberg News Israel Bureau Chief Ethan Brauner in Tel Aviv.
We're expecting a ground operation this week, I imagine, in Khan Yunis, is the main city in the south there, that they believe this is, after all, where Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas, where he's from, and they think that both he and Mohammed Deif, the military chief of Hamas, are underground in tunnels there. So they have started asking people who have either already living there or who've moved there from the north to move yet again. Causing a lot of displacement and concern and fear. And I think it is going to be a difficult week.
Bloomberg's Ethan Brauner says Israel has struck about 200 targets, including weapons storage facilities and a school in northern Gaza where it says Hamas was operating.
Meanwhile, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is sending a warning to Israel about using too much force on civilian populations in Gaza. We get that part of the story from Bloomberg's Ed Baxter.
The caution comes as Israeli soldiers move with great force to the south. Secretary Austin is urging extreme caution.
If you drive them into the arms of the enemy, you replace a tactical victory with a strategic defeat. So I have repeatedly made clear to Israel's leaders that protecting Palestinian civilians in Gaza is both a moral responsibility and a strategic imperative.
Austin has drawn criticism from Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, who calls him naive, saying strategic failure is letting Hamas stand. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
Okay, Ed, thank you. The Biden administration's ramping up pressure on Congress over aid to Ukraine. White House Budget Director SHLANDA says the U.S. will run out of funds to assist Ukraine by the end of this year unless Congress acts. Republican Senator James Lankford says he thinks a deal can get done by then with the funds tied to border security.
We're going to do this all together. That's been the agreement that, again, from the White House originally, it asked for all these things to be together. We have agreed to do all these things to be able together. We can get this done by the end of the year.
Senator Lankford was on ABC's This Week, which you can hear every Sunday on Bloomberg Radio. The White House is seeking more than $61 billion in Ukraine aid as part of a $105 billion emergency package that also includes funds for Israel, Pacific allies, and border security.
Well, we turn to Wall Street now, Nathan, and optimism over Fed rate cuts next year has several markets on the move this morning. We get the latest with Bloomberg's John Tucker. John.
And Karen, traders are still digesting Fed Chair Jerome Powell's comments on Friday. This is part of what he had to say.
We are prepared to tighten policy further if it becomes appropriate to do so.
Well, Powell also said monetary policy is well into restrictive territory, and in the selective hearing of investors, that's the narrative Wall Street latched onto. The S&P 500 continued its march higher Friday. Treasury yields tumbled. And as we start the new trading week, gold earlier shot past a previous all-time high. Bitcoin back above the 41,000 level to the highest since April of 2022. The everything rally will need some data to back it up. The latest reading on job openings, or jolts, that's due tomorrow, and the jobs report is out on Friday. I'm John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, John, thanks. We've also got deals to start the week, including one in the air. Alaska Air Group has agreed to buy rival Hawaiian Airlines. More on that from Bloomberg's Doug Grisner.
Alaska will pay roughly $1 billion for shares in Hawaiian Holdings and take on about $900 million in Hawaiian debt. Hawaiian has been hurt by the slow return of tourism between Asia and Hawaii after the pandemic. The carrier has also struggled as Southwest Airlines ramped up in the Hawaii to U.S. market. Alaska Air's proposal may be tested. The Biden administration's stance on mergers has already thwarted one airline deal, JetBlue Airways' cash takeover of Spirit Airlines. That lawsuit is nearing a close. In New York, I'm Doug Grisner, Bloomberg Radio.
Okay, Doug, thanks. And shares of Alaska Air Group are down more than 9% in early trading.
And we have a deal this morning in the drug industry, Nathan. Roche Holding has agreed to pay as much as $3.1 billion for Carmot Therapeutics. The company is developing a new type of weight loss treatment that sparked a pharma industry gold rush. Carmot's drugs are still in early stages of development, but the deal could lead to a competitor to the likes of Wegovy and Eli Lilly's Zepbound. Analysts estimate the weight loss market could reach $100 billion by the end of the decade. Shares of Roche are up more than 2% overseas.
And shares of Spotify are up more than 2% as well in early trading, Karen. That company is cutting headcount by about 17%. The job cuts will affect about 1,500 people. It is at least the third time this year Spotify has reduced headcount. Spotify is on pace to add more than 100 million users this year. Its biggest year yet. The company also reported a rare profit last quarter.
Now, Nathan, let's get an update from the COP28 climate summit in Dubai. Bill Gates was once the world's richest man, and now he's devoted a large chunk of his fortune to fighting climate change. We asked the Microsoft co-founder if he thinks the world can meet the global warming targets from the 2015 Paris Agreement.
No, we won't hit the aspirational targets. Well, you can do the math on 1.5, and even 2.0 isn't that likely.
And still, Bill Gates says he's still optimistic the world can avoid becoming 3 degrees Celsius warmer than the pre-industrial era. And you can hear more of our conversation with Bill Gates coming up shortly on the program. Time now for a look at some of the other stories making news around the world. For that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Amy Morris. Amy, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. The U.S. Supreme Court will hear arguments today in the bankruptcy deal for OxyContin maker Purdue Pharma. ABC News spoke to attorney Ed Niger, an attorney for some of the plaintiffs who helped negotiate that settlement.
In a way, this case is about deterrence. It's about holding corporate leaders and owners accountable for their business decisions.
The $6 billion deal gives Purdue Pharma's owners the Sackler family immunity, protecting them from lawsuits. A leading national health expert says the U.S. should experience a more typical flu and virus season this winter.
We're probably looking at a more typical winter pathogen season than what we've seen in past years.
Speaking on CBS's Face the Nation, former FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb says the level of RSV and flu cases is abating, but he is still encouraging everyone to get vaccinated. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says about a third of Americans are not getting enough sleep. Nurse Susan Harris, a sleep expert, says sleep controls everything in our lives, and without it, we struggle.
It's essentially another pandemic that we are experiencing.
She says sleep is the most underestimated and underutilized health aid in modern society. The U.S. Air Force says divers have discovered wreckage and remains of crew members from a U.S. Air Force Osprey aircraft that crashed last week off southwestern Japan. Sources say 5 bodies and the bulk of the wreckage were located underwater. The Osprey plunged into the sea off the island of Yakushima on Wednesday. 8 people were on board. The latest class of Kennedy Center honorees were inducted last night, including comedian Billy Crystal, soprano Renee Fleming, singer, songwriter, producer, and member of the Bee Gees Barry Gibb, rapper, singer, and actress Queen Latifah, and singer Dionne Warwick. President Biden says the performing arts reflect who we are as Americans and as human beings.
That's especially true for more than 200 Kennedy Center honorees over the past 46 years who have helped shape how we see ourselves, how we see each other, and how we see our world.
The gala event took place last night, hosted by previous honoree Gloria Estefan. The show will air on Wednesday, December 27th on CBS. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg. Karen.
All right, Amy, thank you. Well, we do bring you news throughout the day, as Amy said, right here on Bloomberg Radio. But also, as she said, you can get the latest news on demand whenever you want it. So the question is, how do you do it? Well, you subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, and then you can get the latest headlines right at the click of a button. Get informed on your schedule. You can listen and subscribe to Bloomberg News Now on the Bloomberg Business app, Bloomberg.com, plus Apple, Spotify, and pretty much anywhere else you get your podcasts. So it's time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update. For that, we bring in John Stashower. John.
Karen, before the NFL kicked off, controversy in college football. The last year that the playoff is only 4 teams. Next year it's going to 12. So the last time this is likely to happen, a team goes undefeated in a Power 5 conference and doesn't get invited. It happened to Florida State, who went 13-0 in the ACC, also beat 2 SEC teams, LSU and Florida. A week ago, the Seminoles were ranked in the top 4. Alabama was only 8th, but the Crimson Tide had the upset of Georgia in the SEC championship game, and Bama is off to the Rose Bowl to play Michigan on New Year's Day. That's the first semifinal. Washington will play Texas in the Sugar Bowl in the other. 2 teams who've never been in the playoff before. It came down to Bama and Florida State, and the committee went with the Crimson Tide, and the Seminoles will settle for the Orange Bowl, which is not a playoff bowl. The big NFL game was in Philadelphia, a rematch of last year's NFC Championship. This time the 49ers won it easily, 42-19. They scored 2 touchdowns in each of the last 3 quarters. Deebo Samuel into the end zone 3 times. Brock Purdy threw 4 TD passes. The Niners are 9-3. The Eagles are 10-2. The Patriots are 2-10, shutout at home for the second time this year. They went to Bailey Zappi as their quarterback. That didn't work. Pats lost to the Chargers 6-0. 4th straight loss for the Commanders, beaten at home by Miami 45-15. The Bruins beat Columbus 3-1. Scotty Scheffler won the World Hero Golf in the Bahamas at 20 under par. John Stashauer, Bloomberg Sports.
From coast to coast, from New York to San Francisco, Boston to Washington, D.C., nationwide on SiriusXM, the Bloomberg Business app, and Bloomberg.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager. Let's get to the latest from the Middle East now, where Israel is warning residents of southern Gaza to evacuate. A new ground invasion of that part of the Palestinian-held enclave is expected soon. At the same time, the U.S. Navy is responding to drone and missile attacks against commercial ships operating in the Red Sea. For the very latest, we are joined now by Bloomberg's Oliver Crook, who has been following this war since the October 7th Hamas attack in southern Israel. Ollie, good morning. What is the latest that we're hearing from the Gaza Strip and beyond?
That's right, Nathan. So we have, after this truce expired on Friday, you had 7-day pause in the fighting. It has really taken a hold once again, and not in any sort of less significant phase. And now we have a new phase, as it's being described by the Israelis, which is really a focus on the southern part of Gaza. We remember that the first part of the operation was that ground offensive after pummeling of the northern part of Gaza. That appears to now be expanding to the south, and that is seemingly going to focus around the city of Khan Yunis, where the Israelis say that the Hamas leadership has entrenched themselves. They're inside the tunnels, is what they're saying. They're asking people to evacuate, to go to now what they've set up are safe zones, no target zones, they say. And again, they have said that they are doing this with a caution to civilian life, and that they have learned some lessons from the north on effectiveness and this sort of thing. But we also need to think about how densely populated now, of course, the south of Gaza is after all of the evacuations from the north. And that was the whole effort for the last 8 weeks, was getting people out of the north into the south. And now the operation will move down that way.
And now the question is, with this idea that Israel has set up some kind of safe zones, and the word we got yesterday from White House National Security spokesman John Kirby, that Israel has even posted maps online where people can go, are those locations as safe as Israel is indicating? I mean, that's the big question right now.
Well, this is a permanent question throughout this. What I think has changed now when we enter into this new phase of the war, yet another phase, is the international scrutiny is even more intense. Perhaps it is not as headline-grabbing, the war, as it was in the very beginning, but there is certainly a lot of pressure on Israel now, and particularly from its historic allies. We've heard comments over the weekend from Emmanuel Macron, who has taken a sort of slightly more measured approach on the Israel issue, saying that basically the aim of eliminating Hamas will require a decade of war, and so that Israel's objectives need to be clarified. But we heard it from Kamala Harris, who was saying that too many Palestinians have died. Blinken, in his third trip to Israel, the tone has shifted and shifted and shifted, saying that really, again, there needs to be fewer people dying as this operation goes on. So you are seeing a shift in that. So perhaps that pressure will have to make that a top priority for the Israelis now.
And I guess I would imagine it would be a little too soon to say whether that shift in rhetoric is actually leading to a shift in tactics when it comes to how Israel carries out this war in the days and weeks to come, and tries more, plainly to show the international community that it is doing what it can to limit civilian casualties.
Yeah, I mean, I think you certainly will get that. You got it from just now from the IDF, a spokesman's coming out, and again, emphasizing the civilian side of it. But again, we heard from the chief of staff from the Israeli Defense Forces over the weekend, and they were being asked basically, what does this thing in the south look like? What does this operation look like? And they would say it will be as thorough in the south as it has been in the north. And again, everyone is going to be paying attention to the casualty numbers, the figure of dead. We understand that figure is now at 15,500 people that have been killed in Gaza since the beginning of this war. 80% of the 2.2 million people have been displaced. I mean, these are just huge figures. The Israelis say that 5,000 are Hamas fighters that are now dead. And again, now the operation is going through the tunnels and dealing with all of these things. But again, we are on day 59 of this. Day 60 is coming up tomorrow, and there's not really an end in sight.
And in the meantime, we mentioned that the U.S. has been responding to attempted attacks and in some cases, I guess, successful attacks as well on commercial shipping in the Red Sea. I mean, there are two potential questions there. What is the risk that this escalates into a wider war? And what's the risk to shipping, to supply lines globally?
It's something that really the market is also very intensely, focused on with all of these sort of spillover effects. And as we know, the United States has been intercepting missiles over the Red Sea over the last few weeks, coming from Yemen all the way up the Red Sea. This is a huge distance to cross. It is a top priority to mitigate all of that. The Saudis that are on the border with Yemen, we understand that they've been firing into their airspace, and all of these are sort of the potential conflict points. However, again, we see all of the same risks we've seen for the last few weeks and months, which is Hezbollah in the north of Israel. Again, there's still some attacks there, but nothing that really stands out as a dramatic escalation. But these are all the things that the market certainly will be paying close attention to, and the United States has its significant naval fleet out there to deter exactly this kind of behavior.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, this week will mark 2 months since the October 7th attack. This Thursday will be that 2-month mark. It raises the question about how much longer this conflict can go on and whether Israel needs to spell out more clearly what its objectives are, what dismantling and destroying Hamas will mean.
This is exactly the point. What does that mean? We know that the aim is to dismantle Hamas. The question is, again, with an insidiousness of an ideology, which is not just composed of a very sort of neat selection of human beings that once they're gone, it's gone. This is the problem, and this is the problem that the Israelis have. And this is where, again, the support of the international community will be tested as this war continues to rumble on. And the other issue you have is, obviously, you have the situation in Gaza, but when you look at the West Bank, after the ceasefire where you had the hostages released, and you have many Palestinian prisoners released, you saw a lot of Hamas flags running in the West Bank because they were seeing this Hamas, to a degree, is standing up for the Palestinian cause. It is bringing results. It is bringing people back home. And again, this only complicates this matter, which, again, it's very hard to be very optimistic about this, but there needs to be some kind of political or diplomatic breakthrough for there to be a durable solution to this conflict that has plagued the region for many, many, many decades.
All right. Bloomberg's Oliver Crook joining us this morning, who's been part of our team covering this conflict between Israel and Hamas since the October 7th attack. And Oliver with us this morning. Thanks again for being with us. And now we want to bring you our conversation with Bill Gates, the co-founder of Microsoft, who is one of the many dignitaries at the COP28 climate summit in Dubai. Gates says the world probably will not meet the goal from the 2015 Paris Agreement of limiting the rise in global temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius. But that doesn't mean he isn't optimistic about the fight against climate change. Bill Gates praised the COP summit for making progress on tackling global warming despite geopolitical tensions. Gates spoke with Bloomberg's Francine Lacroix from Dubai discussing COP28, the warming planet, and how he measures success against climate change. Let's go to part of that discussion.
Climate change, overall, it's a challenge to the world. Hydrocarbons have been very cheap. Our economy is built around coal, gas, oil. And so we have to make this change. The progression of inventing new approaches, green approaches, and then implementing them, and over time scaling them and getting them so cheap, what I call zero green premium, you first have to have risk capital, then you have to have bigger amounts of capital, and eventually, as they say, trillions of dollars to get every country to replace its steel plants, its cement plants. And so depending on the emissions area, some of these things like steel and cement were at the very early stage. Some like electric cars, at least at the high end, the green premium, you could say, is zero. Not for low-cost cars where you park on the street, but, so all these things, and the faster we go, the less temperature increase we'll see.
But do you think we're going fast enough to actually hit the targets that were set out in the Paris Agreement?
No, we won't hit the aspirational targets. Well, you can do the math on 1.5, and even 2.0. isn't that likely. Now, fortunately, if you stay below 3, a lot of the ill effects that people have heard about don't happen unless you really are irresponsible and let it get up to the higher range.
Where do you see the role of fossil fuels going forward?
Well, we have to outcompete fossil fuels. Now, to do that properly, they shouldn't get subsidies, and in fact, a carbon tax over time should be put on so that the new, say the electric car or the plane that use hydrogen, the fact it doesn't emit carbon, you're helping it get adoption. Those companies have skills, if you want to sequester carbon or, nuclear waste, or there's a lot of skills. If you want to make biofuels, some of those companies will take the capital and skills they have. So I wouldn't, say, okay, I wish they weren't there. People still, there's no country that can say, okay, we have zero emissions. People want to drive to work. In fact, the excess supply, when Russia cut off its supply, the world was sort of glad that was available. And so, yes, oil and gas needs to be outcompeted, and those companies need to join the effort.
I know you look at a lot of technologies and a lot of innovation, but is there one thing that you've been most excited about?
If we can get either nuclear fission or fusion to be safe and broadly accepted and very economic, because it's not weather dependent, it would be very complementary to the large amount of solar and wind that we're putting into our electric system. And so I'm biased. I'm a huge investor in both fission and fusion, and hoping that it comes in time.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed at 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, SiriusXM, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.